I always thought I understood what it meant when an empire falls. You hear the stories, slow decline, gradual fading away like an old pub losing its regulars. But living through it, that's a whole different beast. When empires collapse, it's not a gentle sunset. It's a lightning strike. Fast, brutal, and utterly shocking. You don't see it coming until the walls are crashing down around you. Take Old London in 410 AD, or rather, Londinium, as the Romans called it back then. The city had stood proud for centuries, a beacon of Roman power in Britannia. Everyone believed it was untouchable, protected by the gods and the might of the empire. But then the barbarians came knocking. Well, more like knocking down the gates, with a little help from inside. I remember the day the Visigoths, led by a man named Alaric, imagine a guy who looked like he skipped leg day but had the charisma of a pirate captain, circled the city walls. The Senate tried to keep calm, offering gold and promises. Alaric took the bribe, marched off, and people breathed easier. But that was only the beginning. When he came back the next year with a bigger army and emptier pockets on our side, things got ugly fast. It was August 24th, 410. The gates opened, not because of siege engines, but because some of the slaves inside decided they'd had enough and let the Visigoths in like it was a surprise party. Suddenly, Londinium was a nightmare. For 3 days, the streets echoed with looting and screams, temples stripped bare of their gold, wealthy citizens kidnapped for ransom, and common folk fleeing with whatever they could grab. An old cloak here, a rusty dagger there. The city burned, smoke rising like a dark cloud over the empire's pride. What hit me hardest wasn't the destruction. It was the shock. No one believed Londinium could fall. Not after 800 years. The legions weren't even there to defend the city. They were stretched thin across the empire, fighting fires elsewhere. The collapse happened because the empire couldn't pay its defenders anymore. It was like watching a castle crumble because someone forgot to pay the builders. And just like that, what once seemed eternal was reduced to ashes. The fall of Londinium wasn't just a military defeat. It was the death knell of an idea. The empire's invincibility was a myth, and once that myth shattered, everything else followed. Living through that, I realized something terrifying. Empires collapse not over decades, but in days. And when it happens, you're caught in the storm before you even notice the wind picking up. But that was just the first act. The real story, how the collapse feels, how it twists lives, was only beginning. The year was 1940, and I found myself in the heart of England, watching history repeat itself with a modern twist. The world had changed dramatically since the days of Londinium's fall, but the core truth remained. Empires don't decline gently. They crash like a drunken brawl in a seaside pub. France, once the shining jewel of Europe, was basking in a dangerous confidence. They boasted the Maginot Line, a fortress of concrete and steel, supposedly impenetrable. The French army was proud, disciplined, and ready to face any threat. They'd beaten Germany before in the Great War. Surely they could do it again. I remember the newsreels showing soldiers in crisp uniforms, their polished boots gleaming, marching through Paris's grand boulevards. Civilians waved flags and smiled, convinced their world was safe. But then, on May 10th, something unexpected happened. The Germans didn't launch a frontal assault on the Maginot Line. No, they took a different route, through Belgium and the dense Ardennes forest, a place the French command had dismissed as impassable for tanks. Turns out they were wrong. Dead wrong. Within days, German panzers were tearing through the countryside like a hot knife through butter. French soldiers, caught off guard, scrambled to regroup. The British Expeditionary Force found itself trapped at Dunkirk, evacuating under fire. It was chaos. I remember listening to the radio, the crackling voice reporting the fall of Paris, the government fleeing like startled rabbits. By mid-June, German troops marched into the City of Light without firing a shot. 6 weeks. That was all it took for France to go from Europe's strongest military power to an occupied land, 6 weeks to shatter an empire's pride. The government collapsed, replaced by a puppet regime in Vichy, and ordinary people were left to face the harsh reality. Their country had betrayed them. On the streets, the mood changed overnight. Elegant Parisian cafes, once filled with laughter and lively debate, grew silent or whispered with fear. Women in chic dresses, their stockings torn or hastily mended, clutched handbags tighter, eyes darting nervously at uniformed German soldiers patrolling the boulevards. Men who had worn their pride like a badge now walked hunched, avoiding confrontation. I met a woman named Evelyn one evening, her red lipstick smudged, a silk scarf wrapped loosely around her neck, a hint of defiance in her eyes despite the fear. She joked bitterly, "Well, at least the Germans appreciate good fashion." It was a laugh that masked a deeper despair. The currency was worthless, savings evaporated like morning mist, and everyone felt the weight of betrayal, not just by foreign boots on their soil, but by their own leaders who fled when they were needed most. Refugees clogged the roads heading south, their faces pale, carrying what little they could. Children clung to mothers' skirts. Old men shuffled along, their canes tapping a mournful rhythm. The collapse wasn't just a military failure, it was a shattering of faith. Faith in the government, the army, the future. The French people had believed in their invincibility until the moment it was ripped away. And like the citizens of Londinium centuries before, they found themselves caught in a storm they never saw coming. As I stood on the outskirts of a village, watching the sun set over a land that had lost its innocence, I realized something chilling. Empires don't just fall, they unravel, and they do it faster than you can blink. By the time the Soviet Union began its final unraveling in the early 1990s, I was living in a modest flat in a quiet corner of Manchester, watching the world shift beneath my feet like a cracked mirror. The Cold War was over, or so we thought, but what followed was a collapse unlike anything the West had ever witnessed. The USSR had been a behemoth for decades, a superpower boasting thousands of nuclear warheads, and a military that seemed invincible on paper. Their iconic Red Army tanks rolled through parades, and their leaders, with their thick Russian accents and stern expressions, seemed untouchable. But behind the Iron Curtain, everything was rotting. The economy was a house of cards, propped up by outdated factories and endless bureaucracy. People queued for hours for basic goods, bread, meat, even toilet paper. I remember a friend of mine, a Russian immigrant named Ivan, telling me about the lines in Moscow where people stood for hours just to buy a loaf of bread. He laughed bitterly. In Soviet Russia, bread queues you. Then came the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, a moment that was supposed to be a symbol of hope, but instead marked the beginning of the end. Eastern European countries broke free like corks popping from a bottle. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, they all declared independence or reformed their governments. The Soviet Union's grip was slipping, but many still believed the core, the motherland, would hold fast. But it didn't. In August 1991, hardline communists tried a desperate coup to restore the old order. It was a dramatic, almost farcical moment. Tanks rolled into Moscow's streets, but instead of crushing dissent, soldiers refused to fire on the people. Boris Yeltsin, then president of the Russian Federation, climbed atop a tank, shouting defiance, a moment captured in grainy footage that became iconic. The coup collapsed, but the damage was done. The military, which had once been the backbone of Soviet power, fractured. The government lost control. By December, the Soviet Union was no more. Officially dissolved on Christmas Day, 1991, it vanished like smoke in the wind, 15 republics scattering like leaves in a storm. People who had lived under one flag for decades suddenly woke up in new countries. The ruble crashed, inflation soared, savings disappeared overnight. Factories closed, unemployment soared, and crime exploded. The system that guaranteed housing, jobs, and food dissolved, leaving millions adrift. Life on the streets grew desperate. I recall Ivan telling me about the chaos. Gangs controlling neighborhoods, corrupt officials selling weapons, entire regions slipping into lawlessness. It was like the Wild West, he said, but with less horses and more vodka. Women in tailored coats and high heels, once the proud faces of Soviet cities, now walked cautiously, clutching their handbags as if they were shields against an invisible threat. Men wore worn leather jackets, faces lined with worry and exhaustion, eyes constantly scanning for danger. The collapse happened so fast that people didn't have time to grieve. One day they lived in a superpower. The next, their country was a patchwork of fragile states, each struggling to survive. The shock wasn't just political, it was deeply personal. The future they'd planned for, the pensions, the jobs, the social safety nets, all gone in a blink. Watching this from afar, I was struck by one brutal truth. No matter how powerful an empire seems, the moment confidence disappears, it crumbles. The Soviet Union wasn't destroyed by missiles or bombs. It was destroyed by its own people losing faith in the system. And as I listened to Ivan's stories, I wondered, how close are we to that moment? Because the signs, the warning cracks, they're there. Just like in Londinium and Paris, the dam is leaking. The question is, how long before it bursts? The thing about watching empires crumble is that it's not just history books or distant news reports. It's a front-row seat to chaos. And right now, I'm standing in the eye of a storm that feels all too familiar here in the United States. You'd think a country with the world's largest economy and the most powerful military would be immune, right? Well, that's what everyone said about Rome, France, and the Soviet Union too. It all starts with confidence, or rather, the loss of it. Empires don't collapse because they run out of resources. They collapse because people stop believing in the system that holds everything together. The currency, the military, the government, all rely on trust. When that trust breaks, everything comes crashing down like a house of cards. Think of it like a dam holding back a rising flood. For years, cracks form. You hear the engineers warning, but the public shrugs it off. It's fine. We've fixed worse leaks. Meanwhile, water seeps in, pressure builds, and then, bam, the dam breaks. Not slowly, but all at once. In the US, those cracks have been widening for decades. The 2008 financial crisis was a big jolt, but many thought it was a one-off. Then came the endless wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, draining resources and morale. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed how fragile the system really was. Money printing, massive debts, political gridlock, you name it, we've got it. The truth? We've been in denial. Our leaders, the media, the elites, they insist everything is fine. The economy is strong, they say. Our military is unbeatable. The dollar is safe. Trust the system. Sound familiar? But behind the scenes, confidence is evaporating. Military recruitment is down. Our Navy has fewer ships than China, and our Air Force is flying planes older than some pilots. The dollar's grip on the world is slipping. Countries are making deals in other currencies. Political approval ratings are in the basement. Congress is at 20%. People don't trust the police, the courts, or even the media anymore. And then there was Afghanistan. 20 years, $2 trillion, the most advanced military on earth. And we lost in 11 days. The images from Kabul airport were a nightmare. Desperate people clinging to planes, chaos everywhere, 13 U.S. soldiers dead. The world watched, and the message was clear. America isn't invincible. That moment, that was the crack widening in the dam, the credibility break. Suddenly, allies question our promises. Enemies test our resolve. Investors start eyeing other currencies. Confidence cracks. And when that happens, the cascade begins. I met Sarah in a small town in Virginia just a few months ago. She was a school teacher, always dressed neatly. Soft cashmere sweaters, tailored skirts that hinted at curves, and a simple silver necklace catching the light when she talked. She told me she doesn't trust the future anymore. "I keep telling my students history repeats itself," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But they think I'm crazy, that it can't happen here." I smiled, but inside I knew she wasn't wrong. The collapse isn't some distant possibility. It's starting. And the worst part? When it hits, it will be faster and more violent than anything we've seen before. Because in our hyper-connected world, confidence can evaporate overnight. Markets can crash in minutes. Information spreads instantly. So what happens next? That, my friend, is the question nobody wants to answer. The moment the dam breaks, everything spirals out of control, faster than you can imagine. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing your paycheck won't stretch to buy groceries. Your savings have vanished, and the streets you've walked all your life feel suddenly unsafe. That's what the freefall phase looks like, and it's brutal. I was in a small town in Ohio when the first real signs hit. Shops were shuttered, shelves empty except for dusty cans and stale bread. The gas stations had lines stretching around the block, but the pumps ran dry by noon. People who once greeted you with a smile now avoided eye contact, eyes darting nervously as if danger lurked behind every corner. I met Mark, a burly man in his 40s with a trimmed beard and a worn leather jacket, who used to run a hardware store. He told me about the first time his business failed. "One day, suppliers just stopped showing up," he said, voice low. "No nails, no tools, nothing. I tried to keep going, but how do you build anything when you have no materials? The banks stopped lending and customers vanished. Crime exploded. Without functioning police forces who weren't getting paid, neighborhoods turned into battlegrounds. Home invasions, carjackings, armed robberies. People formed militias, some for protection, others for power. The wealthy hired private security, barricaded themselves behind gates and cameras. The rest? Left to fend for themselves. I remember walking through a neighborhood where a group of young men, faces half covered with scarves, stood by a burnt-out car, laughing and shouting. Their energy was dangerous, raw. I asked an elderly woman nearby what she thought. She glanced at them with weary eyes and said, "This isn't the country I raised my children in. It's a war zone now, but nobody's fighting for flags. They're fighting to survive." Electricity and water became unreliable. Blackouts lasted for days. Food shortages were common. Hospitals struggled to function. People queued for hours at relief centers, hoping for a scrap. Meanwhile, the government was a ghost, unable to pay its bills, unable to enforce laws, losing legitimacy by the hour. Politicians made promises, but no one believed them. Laws were passed, but nobody obeyed. The social contract was broken. In these dark times, communities either fractured or came together. I met Anna, a nurse with sharp green eyes and a determined jawline, who organized a small neighborhood watch. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a fitted jacket, but carried herself like a soldier. "We can't wait for help," she told me. "We have to protect each other or we're done for." Her grit was inspiring, but the fear was always beneath the surface. It felt like the country was unraveling thread by thread, every day bringing new challenges. The collapse wasn't just economic or political, it was deeply personal. People lost their homes, their jobs, their sense of safety. Families were torn apart. The future became a dark unknown. And yet, amid the chaos, some glimmers of hope flickered. Communities banded together, sharing resources, protecting the vulnerable. Old rivalries faded in the face of survival. But hope was fragile. like a candle fighting wind. As I left that town, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The free fall wasn't a sudden plunge. It was a long, brutal slide. And the question haunting me was, how far down could we go before hitting rock bottom? As the free fall deepened, something else began to take shape. The fragmentation. The once united country started to crack like old plaster, revealing the raw, jagged edges beneath. States stopped listening to Washington. Governors made deals with foreign powers. Borders blurred as regional leaders asserted their own authority. The empire was breaking apart piece by piece. I found myself in Austin, Texas during this shift. The city buzzed with a strange energy, part defiance, part desperation. The streets were filled with pickup trucks sporting flags not just of Texas, but of various militia groups and even foreign entities. The air smelled of barbecue and gunpowder, a peculiar mix that somehow captured the mood perfectly. A woman named Claire caught my attention. She was a striking figure, tall with fiery red hair pulled into a loose bun, wearing a simple white blouse tucked into rugged jeans and boots scuffed from miles of walking. Around her neck hung a pendant shaped like the Lone Star. Despite the chaos, she moved with purpose. Claire told me, "The feds can't help us anymore. We're on our own. If Texas wants to survive, we have to take care of ourselves." Across the country, similar scenes played out. California was negotiating trade agreements directly with China, ignoring federal tariffs. The Pacific Northwest formed alliances to protect resources and technology. In the Midwest, farming communities banded together to control food supplies, wary of outsiders. The idea of a united nation was fading fast. The military, once the pride of the nation, was unraveling too. Bases closed due to lack of funding. Soldiers were pulled back home, many refusing orders or defecting to local militias. Equipment rusted in forgotten hangars. The mighty arsenal of democracy was becoming a collection of relics. The economy, already crippled, fractured along regional lines. Currencies started to emerge, local tokens, barter systems, even crypto in some tech hubs. The dollar's dominance crumbled like a sandcastle at high tide, but perhaps most unsettling was the growing sense of isolation. Neighbors who once shared barbecues and holidays now eyed each other with suspicion. Borders within the country became checkpoints, armed and tense. Families were split as some states closed doors to outsiders. In one quiet moment, Claire confided, "I never thought I'd see the day when America was a collection of little countries, but the truth is we're all just trying to survive. The old rules don't apply anymore." Walking through the streets of Austin, I saw murals painted over boarded-up shops, images of stars breaking apart, hands reaching out, and slogans like "United No More" scrawled in bold letters. The sense of loss was palpable, but so was a fierce determination. The empire was no more. What came next was uncertain, a patchwork of fractured states, new powers rising from the ashes, and a people struggling to redefine themselves. The great American experiment was tearing itself apart, and the question hung heavy. Could anything truly be rebuilt from this ruin? But even as fragmentation set in, whispers of a darker force lurking in the shadows began to surface. Something beneath the surface, pulling strings in the chaos. And that, I realized, might be the greatest threat of all. Amid the fractures and chaos, I found myself drawn to New York City, a place that once symbolized American might and resilience, but now felt like a ghost of its former self. Skyscrapers loomed like silent sentinels, their glass facades reflecting a city in free fall. The streets buzzed with tension. The hum of everyday life had been replaced by the low growl of uncertainty. I met Jessica in a small cafe tucked away in Soho. She was striking, dark hair cascading over a crimson blouse that hugged her slender frame, paired with a pencil skirt and heels that clicked sharply on the worn wooden floor. Her makeup was impeccable, a bold red lip contrasting with a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. Jessica worked as a financial analyst before everything unraveled, but now she navigated a world where numbers lost meaning overnight. The dollar's collapse wasn't just economic, she told me, swirling her coffee absent-mindedly. It shattered trust. People stopped believing in the system. Banks closed, ATMs ran dry, and suddenly your money was just paper. She paused, then smirked wryly. I always thought the stock market was a roller coaster, but this was a free fall without brakes. The city had become a battleground between those clinging to the old ways and others carving out new rules. Gangs controlled neighborhoods and private security forces guarded high-rise penthouses. Jessica's eyes flicked nervously toward the window, where uniformed guards patrolled the street below. Supply chains were broken. Shelves in grocery stores were bare. Electronics, medicine, even basic necessities became luxuries. The city's famed nightlife faded into darkness, replaced by curfews and caution. People who once danced under neon lights now whispered in shadowed alleys. Yet amid the gloom, a strange resilience flickered. Jessica spoke of underground networks, people sharing food, information, and protection. It's like the city's heartbeat is changing, she said. The old pulse is gone, but something new is trying to take its place. But beneath the surface, a more sinister force was growing. Corruption thrived where authority faltered. Secret deals between shadowy figures shaped the city's fate. Rumors spread of a cabal manipulating markets, controlling resources, and profiting from the chaos. Jessica's voice dropped. It's like the collapse is a game to them, a power play while the rest of us scramble. Her story was a stark reminder. When empires fall, it's not just governments or armies that fail, it's the very fabric of society. Trust crumbles, and with it the line between order and anarchy blurs. As I left the cafe and stepped into the cold night, the city's skyline glittered deceptively. Beneath the sparkling lights lay a city on the brink, a place where survival was a daily struggle, and shadows held secrets waiting to be uncovered. And somewhere in that darkness, the true puppeteers of the collapse were pulling strings, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In the midst of the chaos, I found myself drawn to Detroit, a city once known for its roaring factories and blue-collar pride, now a sprawling landscape of forgotten dreams and shattered glass. The air smelled of rust and rain, and the streets echoed with the distant howl of wind through abandoned buildings. Yet, amid the decay, there was a strange pulse, a heartbeat of people refusing to give up. I met Marcus there, a tall man with a shaved head and eyes sharp as a hawk. He wore a faded leather jacket over a simple black shirt, jeans tucked into worn boots. Tattoos peeked from under his sleeves, telling stories of a past life filled with both pain and resilience. Marcus was part of a community group trying to rebuild what had been lost, organizing food distribution, securing neighborhoods, and offering protection where the government had long since disappeared. People think Detroit's dead, Marcus said, his voice low but steady. But we're just survivors. We've been through worse. When everything fell apart, we had to learn fast, how to trust again, how to fight for each other. He showed me a community center turned fortress, walls covered in murals depicting strength and unity. Women in practical boots and cargo pants moved purposefully, carrying supplies and tending to children. Men like Marcus patrolled the streets, not as soldiers of an empire, but as guardians of a fragile hope. But survival came at a cost. Crime was rampant. Gangs ruled territories like feudal lords, and disputes often ended in violence. Power shifted quickly, alliances formed and shattered overnight. The line between protector and predator blurred. Marcus admitted, "Sometimes we have to make deals with the devil just to keep the peace." The economy was unrecognizable. Cash was useless. Barter and trade became the lifeblood. People traded everything, from canned goods to handmade tools to stolen electronics. I saw a makeshift market where a woman exchanged a knitted scarf for a few cans of beans. The currency of trust was more valuable than money. Despite the hardships, a fierce sense of community blossomed. Neighbors shared what little they had. Stories around fires replaced the news broadcasts, and old rivalries softened in the face of common struggle. Marcus spoke of a new kind of patriotism, not to a country or flag, but to each other. Yet, even here, shadows lurked, whispers of organized groups exploiting the chaos for profit, rumors of weapons smuggling, black markets controlled by unseen hands. And always the question, who really holds the power when the government fades away? As I left Detroit, the sun breaking through dark clouds, I realized the collapse wasn't just about loss. It was about transformation, brutal, painful, but also strangely human. But beneath the surface, a darker mystery remained unsolved. In the ruins of empire, who truly pulls the strings? And what price will we pay to find out? The deeper I ventured into the fractured remains of the nation, the more I realized the collapse wasn't just a series of random disasters. It was a carefully choreographed dance of power and desperation. And nowhere was this clearer than in Washington, D.C., the heart that once pumped life into the empire now struggling to beat. The Capitol was a shadow of its former glory. Once majestic government buildings stood half-empty or barricaded behind layers of security. Streets, usually bustling with politicians, lobbyists, and tourists, were eerily quiet. Armed guards patrolled in small clusters, faces grim beneath their helmets. The echo of footsteps on marble halls was the closest thing to life left. I met David, a former congressional aide with a sharp suit, now replaced by a faded jacket and worn trousers. His eyes were tired but sharp, like a man who had seen too many secrets. He told me, "This place used to run the world. Now, it's a cage. Everyone's looking over their shoulder, waiting for the next collapse." David spoke of the cracks within the government, fierce infighting, betrayal, and a desperate scramble for control. Political factions weren't just divided, they were at war. Votes were rigged, scandals buried, and alliances forged in shadows. Trust was a currency no one had. Behind closed doors, power brokers played a dangerous game. Lobbyists with hidden agendas, foreign agents with dark smiles, and wealthy elites hoarding resources while the nation burned. David whispered of secret meetings where decisions were made not for the people, but for survival of themselves. The real collapse, he said, happened in here long before the streets caught fire. The military was fractured too. Commanders struggled to maintain order, some loyal to the old regime, others swayed by regional powers or private militias. The chain of command was a tangle of whispers and threats. Soldiers once proud and disciplined now questioned their orders, some deserting, others turning rogue. Outside the Capitol, protests and riots erupted, fueled by desperation and broken promises. The police, stretched thin and underfunded, often stood aside or joined the chaos. The social fabric was tearing, thread by thread. And yet, amid the decay, a shadowy figure emerged, a puppet master pulling strings from behind the curtain. No one knew their face or their name, but their influence was undeniable. Whispers called them the Architect, a mastermind orchestrating the chaos to reshape the nation in their image. David's voice dropped to a near whisper. "If we don't find who's behind this, there won't be a nation left to save." As I left the Capitol, the weight of his words settled heavy. The empire's fall was not just a story of collapse. It was a tale of control, betrayal, and a dangerous game far from the public eye. The question now was clear. Who is the architect? And more importantly, what is their end game? The night was heavy with silence as I stood on the rooftop, overlooking a crumbling city, streets once alive with ambition, now shadowed by uncertainty. The empire I'd known, the country I'd believed was unbreakable, was unraveling before my eyes. But beneath the rubble, a deeper truth stirred, one that threatened to rewrite everything. The architect, the mysterious force pulling strings from the shadows, was no mere opportunist. This was a calculated design, a blueprint for a new order born from chaos. Whispers in dark corridors spoke of secret plans to reshape borders, economies, and loyalties. The collapse wasn't an accident, it was a reset. I thought back to the stories of Londinium's fall, Paris swallowed in weeks, and the Soviet Union's rapid disintegration. Each empire had its final moment, a spark that lit the fuse. Now the fuse was burning here, faster than anyone dared admit. But the most chilling realization, this wasn't just about power or politics. It was about survival, survival for those who controlled the levers, and oblivion for everyone else. As dawn broke, painting the skyline with a cold, unforgiving light, I understood the stakes. The collapse was accelerating, the dam had shattered, and the flood was unstoppable. Yet, in the rising tide, a choice remained: adapt, resist, or drown. And somewhere, hidden from view, the architect watched it all unfold, waiting to see who would rise from the ashes and who would be swept away forever. The story isn't over. In fact, it's only just beginning. And the next chapter? Well, that's the mystery we all have to solve, because when empires fall, the real battle isn't just for power. It's for the soul of what comes next.